Today we're looking at the Math Calculator portion of Practice Test 5, and there are 11 questions. Number 2. Some values of the linear function f are shown in the table above. Which of the following defines f? It might be tempting to identify that we are increasing each time by 8, and think of our slope as 8. However, take a look at what our x values are increasing by. We're not going up by 1, in fact we're going up by 2. A more consistent approach is to consider these first two rows as coordinates. Then we can use the change in slope formula to identify our slope. So if we take y2 minus y1, or 13 minus 5, and divide this by x2 minus x1, we get 8 over 2, which reduces to 4. That tells us our slope is 4. C is the only choice that has a slope of 4. Number 4. If 3 times the quantity c plus d is equal to 5, what is the value of c plus d? We can divide both sides by 3, and this cancels out the 3 over 3 on the left, because that's just 1. And this quantity c plus d is equal to 5/3. B. Number 6. An online bookstore sells novels and magazines. Each novel sells for $4, and each magazine sells for $1. If Sadie purchased a total of 11 novels and magazines that have a combined selling price of $20, how many novels did she purchase? From this paragraph, we can identify two equations. First, that 4 times n for novel, and 1 times m, or just m, for magazine. A total selling price of 20. And then the total novels and magazines put together, or n plus m, is equal to 11. Since we know we want to identify how many novels she purchased, we can subtract all 3 columns straight down, as our coefficients for m and m are both 1. This gives us 3n is equal to 9, as the m's cancel out, and when I divide both sides by 3, n is equal to 3. B. Number 11. In the xy plane, the graph of which of the following equations is perpendicular to the graph of the equation above? To identify the slope, we can rewrite this equation in slope-intercept form. To do that, we want to solve for y. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 2x to both sides. That way this part on the left cancels out. And when I have 3y is equal to 2x plus 6, I'm going to divide everything by 3. And the equation of this line in slope-intercept form is y is equal to 2/3 x plus 2. The slope then is 2/3, because that is my m value. A perpendicular slope would be the opposite reciprocal. So the opposite reciprocal of 2/3 would be a negative 3/2. So I know that is going to be my slope. So if we try one of these answer choices, such as A, we're going to follow those same steps where we subtract the x term from the left side to cancel it out. And then we're going to rewrite it in classic y equals mx plus b format and divide out our coefficient for y. And we see here that negative 3 over 2 is the slope we get. That's why A is perpendicular. We could have identified this just by looking at the coefficients. We know we're going to subtract the x term and divide by the y term. So a negative 3/2, a negative 3/4, a negative 2/4, or a negative half, and a negative 2/6, or a negative 1/3. That's why A was correct. Number 12. 1/2 y is equal to 4, and x minus 1/2 y is equal to 2. The system of equations above has solution xy. What is the value of x? The first step is to directly substitute what 1/2 y is equal to into the other equation. This becomes x minus 4 is equal to 2. And then we just add 4 to both sides, and we get that x is equal to 6. That's why D was the best answer. 13. Which of the following ordered pairs, x, y, satisfies the system of inequalities above? There are two approaches to solving this problem, the first of which is just to guess and check, to try to plug in each of these 4 coordinates into both inequalities and see which one is true for both inequalities. It's time-consuming, but it does work. If I tell you that the answer is D and I plug in the x and y coordinates like so, I notice that 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7, which is greater than or equal to negative 1. And 2 plus 1, since there's 2 negatives, is 3, which is greater than 1. That's why D is correct. Alternately, I could solve this second equation for y. So if I start with x minus y is greater than 1, I'm going to subtract x from both sides. I'll put the x first, then the number, and I'm going to divide out this negative 1. And remember, when I divide by a negative number, the inequality flips. So the alternate version of this inequality is y is less than x minus 1. So if y is both less than or equal to 3x plus 1 and less than x minus 1, there are two different conditions. If x is going to be larger than negative 1, so something like a positive number or 0, then it's true that 3x plus 1 is greater than x minus 1. Which follows then that since the 3x plus 1 is going to be larger than x minus 1, to figure out which numbers will be true for both inequalities, I'm going to use the smaller one, or y is less than x minus 1. And in the event that x is less than or equal to negative 1, the opposite is true, and the 3x plus 1 is the smaller or equal to. So for if I want to choose a coordinate that meets both inequalities, I'm going to choose the smaller of the two. And when x is negative, or further negative than negative 1, then this is the smaller of the inequalities, so it has to meet this one for sure. And if so, it will definitely meet the other. If I look at my answer choices, I see that choice C and D are going to be plugged into this equation here on the inequality on the left, and A and B are going to be plugged into this inequality on the right, because the x coordinates here are greater than negative 1, and the x coordinates here are less than or equal to negative 1. So if I plug in the coordinates for all four of these, I see for A that negative 1 is not less than negative 2 minus 1, since negative 1 is not less than negative 3. If I take negative 1 minus 1, I get negative 2, which is not larger than 3. If I take 3 times 1 plus 1, I get 4, which is not greater than 5. But if I take 3 times 2 plus 1, that's 7, which is larger than or equal to negative 1, and that's why D is the only correct answer choice. 23. We have this Townsend Realty Group Investments with different addresses, purchase price, and monthly rental prices. And they're asking the relationship between the monthly rental price R in dollars and the property's purchase price P in thousands of dollars can be represented by a linear function. Which of the following functions represents the relationship? So I can build my equation. R of P is equal to MP plus B, where R of P is my monthly rental price, P is my purchase price, M is the slope of my linear equation, and B is my intercept. I can create a system of equations using any of these different property addresses, at least two of them. I'm going to choose Clearwater Lane and Edgemont Street because they have the smallest monthly rental prices, so it'll make the math a little bit easier. The equation for Clearwater Lane becomes 950 is equal to 128. Remember, our price is in thousands, that's why I'm not putting 128,000. Times my slope plus my B value. For Edgemont Street, it's 515 is equal to 70 times my slope plus my B value. I can subtract all three columns straight down to cancel out my B's. And I'm left with 435 is equal to 58M. If I divide both sides by a 58, I'm left with 7.5 is equal to M. So therefore D is the answer, because that is the only equation that has a slope of 7.5. I could have chosen any of these rows to use as coordinates. I simply chose the two with the smallest y values. 24, same scenario, Realty Group Investments. And Townsend Realty purchased the Glenview Street property and received a 40% discount off the original price, along with an additional 20% off the discounted price for purchasing the property in cash. Which of the following best approximates the original price in dollars of the Glenview Street property? So if I read the table correctly, my purchase price for Glenview is $140,000. And we'll call that X, and we'll set it equal to $140,000. However, I received a 40% discount, so we'll call that 0.6x, which means x multiplied by 60%. Out of an original 100, if I subtract 40, I have 60%. That's how much I paid. Then there's an additional 20% off the discounted price. So an additional discount of 20% I will represent as 0.8, since I'm multiplying by the remaining 80%. I can multiply these discounts straight across, and I have 0.48x is equal to 140,000. To solve for x, we divide both sides by 0.48, which we know dividing by about a half is going to about double it. So B is the best choice here. No calculator required. 25. A psychologist set up an experiment to study the tendency of a person to select the first item when presented with a series of items. In the experiment, 300 people were presented with a set of 5 pictures arranged in random order. Each person was asked to choose the most appealing picture. Of the first 150 participants, 36 chose the first picture in the set. Among the remaining 150 participants, P people chose the first picture in the set. If more than 20% of all participants chose the first picture in the set, which of the following inequalities best describes the possible values of P? So we know that there are 300 people total, and we know what 150 of them chose. We might represent this as 36 out of the first 150 and some number P out of the second 150. However, they want to set up an inequality for all participants. So I can combine those by saying that 36 plus some number P out of the total 300 chose the first picture. Later on we read that more than 20% of all participants chose that first picture. And I can translate that into an inequality by describing it as 36 plus P divided by 300 is greater than 0.2. You might notice that none of my answer choices look exactly like this, so I can simplify a little bit by multiplying both sides by 300. On the left, this cancels out, and I have 36 plus P. And on the right, 300 times 0.2. Well, I could simplify it, but we notice that D leaves it just like that. 28. The graph of the linear function f is shown in the xy plane to the left. The slope of the graph of the linear function g is 4 times the slope of the graph of f. If the graph of g passes through the point 0, -4, what is the value of g of 9? So the graph shows f of x, and if we pick a couple points, 0, 3, and 2, 4, we can find the slope and the intercept using these points. We notice that when we go 2 to the right, we go up 1. And slope is written as rise over run, so it's up 1 over 2, 1/2. And my intercept, when x is 0, what is y? It's 3. They tell us that for g, or for function g, the slope is 4 times this slope. So if I take 1/2 and I multiply it by 4, I get 2. And I know that this function passes through the point 0, -4. So I will start with y equals mx plus b. And for y, I'm going to plug in my -4 for my coordinate. For m, I'm going to plug in 2 for my slope, and 0 for my coordinate, and add b. 2 times 0 cancels out, so I know that my b value is -4. This tells me that the equation for linear function g is 2x minus 4, and they want to know what is the value of g of 9. That means I'm going to plug 9 into this equation. So it becomes 2 times 9 minus 4, or 18 minus 4, which is just 14. Which is why the answer was C. 33. On line PS above, PQ is equal to RS. What is the length of PS? So if PQ and RS are equal to each other, I can set them equal in an equation. And from here, I will add 7 to both sides and subtract x from both sides. And this gives me 6 is equal to 2x. Notice the x's are canceled out here, the 7's are canceled out there. When I divide both sides by 2, 3 is equal to x. And this tells me that x is 3 here. And this part is 3 minus 1, which is just 2. And this part is 3 times 3, 9 minus 7, which is just 2. So 2 plus 3 plus 2, then my total length is 7.